Stand on any street corner in London today, and you'll hear a dozen languages in as many minutes. Nearly 40% of Londoners were born outside the United Kingdom. This city, loud, crowded, endlessly complicated, is home to 9 million people and the beating heart of a civilization that spans centuries. But rewind 2,000 years, and you'd find nothing here but marshland along a tidal river. The Thames, wide, cold, and indifferent. No bridge, no port, no city, just a place where the water narrowed enough to cross and the gravel banks were firm enough to stand on. The year is 43 AD. Emperor Claudius has ordered the invasion of Britannia, not because it's easy, but because Rome needs the win. 4 legions, roughly 40,000 soldiers, have landed on the Kent coast and are pushing inland. They need a river crossing, a bridgehead, a supply line back to the continent. They find it here, at the river's lowest tidal crossing, where the water is deep enough for ocean vessels but narrow enough to bridge. The gravel banks on both sides are solid. The location is perfect. Within weeks, Roman engineers are driving wooden piles into the riverbed. The first London Bridge is under construction. It stands almost exactly where London Bridge stands today. Around that bridge, a town erupts almost overnight, Londinium. Within a decade, it's already busy, beyond anything the local tribes could have imagined. Merchants from Gaul, soldiers from Syria, traders from North Africa. The port handles wine, olive oil, fine pottery, precious metals. London's first identity isn't political, it's commercial. It was built to move goods and make money, and it never really stopped. At its peak, Londinium is home to perhaps 60,000 people, the largest city in Britannia. The Forum Basilica, completed around 100 AD, is the largest building north of the Alps. There's an amphitheater beneath what is now the Guildhall. There are temples, bathhouses, a governor's palace. This isn't a frontier outpost. This is a proper Roman city, and it sits at the center of everything. But 17 years after its founding, Londinium faces its first destruction. Queen Boudicca of the Iceni tribe has watched the Romans take her land, flog her in public, and assault her daughters. Her patience is gone. In 60 AD, she raises an army, estimates suggest 80,000 warriors, and begins marching south. The Roman governor Paulinus is campaigning in Wales. He can't get back in time. Londinium is undefended. The governor makes a brutal calculation. He orders Londinium evacuated and abandons it. Those who can't flee, the elderly, the sick, those who simply don't believe the danger is real, are killed when Boudicca's army arrives. The city is burned to the ground. Modern archaeologists have found that layer of destruction 4 meters below the streets of the city of London. A band of red ash and burnt debris. The mark of Boudicca, preserved in the earth for 2,000 years. The Romans rebuild, not just the same city, a better one. They construct a massive defensive wall around Londinium, 3 kilometers long, 6 meters high, with bastions and gates. Parts of that wall still exist today, buried in the basements of office buildings and car parks across the city of London. You can stand next to Roman stonework on your lunch break, if you know where to look. The wall defines London's boundaries for over 1,000 years. Even today, the square mile, the financial district, the City of London, follows almost exactly the footprint of the Roman walls. Every morning, hundreds of thousands of people commute into a space the Romans drew in the 2nd century AD. For 3 centuries, Londinium thrives. But by the late 4th century, Rome itself is in trouble. Barbarian tribes, Visigoths, Vandals, Huns, are pressing from every direction. The empire is too large, too expensive, too stretched. Legions are being pulled back from the frontier provinces. Britain is far away and costs more than it returns. In 410 AD, the Emperor Honorius sends word to the cities of Britain, "Defend yourselves." The legions are not coming back. The soldiers march to the docks and sail away. And just like that, after 3.5 centuries, Rome is gone. Not with a battle, not with a conquest, just departure. Without Rome, Londinium's economy collapses within a generation. The trade networks that brought wine from Gaul and olive oil from Spain simply stop. Roman currency becomes worthless. The merchants leave. The officials leave. The skilled craftsmen leave. A city of perhaps 50,000 people dwindles to a few hundred. Squatters living in the ruins of something they don't fully understand, in buildings they can no longer maintain. For the next 2 centuries, the grand buildings slowly fall apart. Roofs cave in, walls crumble. The amphitheater fills with mud and vegetation. The Forum, once the largest building north of the Alps, becomes a ruin that nobody living has seen in use. The city that Rome built simply stops, and the Thames keeps flowing, indifferent, waiting for whoever comes next. The people who fill the vacuum left by Rome are nothing like the Romans. The Saxons, Germanic tribes from what is now northern Germany and Denmark, are not city builders. They are farmers, village people. They distrust large settlements, large organizations, large anything. They spread across Britannia in small communities, clearing forest, planting fields, building in wood. When the Saxons encounter the ruins of Londinium, they don't move in, they avoid it. The crumbling stone buildings, the silent streets, the scale of the walls, none of it makes sense to people who build in timber and thatch. An Anglo-Saxon poet writing in this period calls the ruins the work of giants. He cannot imagine how mere humans built such things. The Roman city becomes a ghost town, literally, a place Saxons believed was haunted, cursed, best left alone. Instead, around the 600s and 70s, the Saxons build their own town, about a mile west of the Roman walls, along the river. They call it Londonwic, trading town. This is where modern Covent Garden and the Strand are today. If you've ever watched a performance at the Royal Opera House, you were sitting directly above Saxon London. The foundations of their market stalls lie beneath the piazza. By the early 700s, Londonwic is genuinely thriving. Amber arrives from the Baltic. Millstones and wine jars come from the Rhineland. Pottery and metalwork from France and Germany. At its peak, perhaps 8,000 people live here. Not huge by Roman standards, but busy, productive, and connected to a world that stretches from Scandinavia to the Mediterranean. Then the Vikings arrive. Starting in the late 8th century, Norse raiders begin hitting the English coast with increasing frequency and ferocity. They're not just raiding monasteries anymore. They figured out that rivers are highways, and the Thames leads straight to the wealthiest trading town in England. In 842, they sack Londonwic. Contemporary records describe the slaughter as beyond counting. The Saxons rebuild. In 851, the Vikings come back and do it again, this time with 350 ships. The settlement is destroyed twice in less than a decade. Something has to change. King Alfred the Great has spent his reign fighting the Vikings to a standstill. In 886, he retakes London from Danish control and makes a decision that will shape the city for centuries. He abandons Londonwic entirely and moves everyone back inside the old Roman walled city. The walls that have stood empty for 400 years suddenly make perfect military sense. Alfred repairs them, recuts the defensive ditches, and lays out a new street grid inside. The city is renamed Lundenburg, London Fortress. Londonwic is left empty. Over time it earns a new name, Ealdwic, the old settlement. That name survives today as Aldwych, the curved street in central London, a linguistic fossil of a 1,000-year-old abandonment. Meanwhile, inside the walls, London is alive again. Markets return, churches are built. The street patterns Alfred laid out can still be traced in the city of London today. Over the next century and a half, London changes hands repeatedly between Saxon and Danish rulers. Each side understands what the city means. Whoever controls London controls trade, controls the river, controls England. In 1016, the Danish king Canute, yes, the one from the legend about commanding the tides, makes London his capital. The city has become too important to ignore, whatever your nationality. When Edward the Confessor becomes king in 1042, he makes a decision that divides London's identity to this day. He builds his palace and his abbey not inside the city walls, but a mile west, at Westminster, on a marshy island in the Thames. The city for commerce, Westminster for power. That division, the financial district east, the political district west, still defines London's geography almost 1,000 years later. Edward the Confessor dies childless on the 5th of January, 1066. He leaves behind no clear heir and 3 men who each believe the throne is theirs by right. Harold Godwinson, the most powerful English earl, Harold Hardrada of Norway, who claims a dynastic right, and William, Duke of Normandy, who says Edward promised him the crown in person. England is about to be torn apart, and London will be at the center of everything that follows. Harold is crowned king the very day after Edward's death. But within months, a comet blazes across the sky, what we now know as Halley's Comet. The Saxons see it as an omen of disaster. The Bayeux Tapestry records it. The comet above, Harold on his throne, and beneath him, men whispering of terrible things to come. They aren't wrong. Harold marches north, defeats the Norwegian invasion at Stamford Bridge, then turns his exhausted army around and marches south again, 250 miles in 9 days. On October the 14th, he meets William at Hastings. By nightfall, Harold is dead. An arrow through the eye, according to legend, though the truth is probably more brutal. The Saxon line breaks, England falls, and the world that London has known for 6 centuries ends in a single afternoon. William doesn't march straight to London. He circles it first, burning the surrounding towns, cutting supply routes, demonstrating to the city's population exactly what resistance will cost. London's leaders get the message. On Christmas Day, 1066, in Westminster Abbey, the building Edward the Confessor built and never saw completed, William is crowned King of England. The Norman era begins, and London will never be the same again. The coronation itself is a disaster. When the congregation cheers William's crowning inside Westminster Abbey, his Norman soldiers outside mistake the noise for a Saxon uprising. They panic and set fire to the surrounding buildings. The new King of England is crowned amid smoke and screaming, his soldiers burning his new capital around him. It is, in retrospect, a perfectly fitting beginning. William doesn't entirely trust London's population. They're wealthy, they're organized, and they supported Harold, so he builds not 1 but 3 fortresses to control them. The largest becomes the Tower of London. The White Tower, its central keep, is a statement in stone, 90 feet high, walls 12 feet thick in places, built not to protect Londoners, but to intimidate them. Every morning they wake up and see it on the skyline. That is the point. The tower will serve as royal palace, treasury, prison, execution ground, zoo, and mint over the next 1,000 years. Anne Boleyn will be imprisoned here. Thomas More will be beheaded here. The crown jewels are still kept here today. William chose the location with geometric precision, beside the river, inside the Roman walls, at the eastern entrance to the city. Whoever controls the tower controls London. He understood that from the first stone. The Normans don't just conquer England, they rewrite it. Norman French becomes the language of law, of court, of power. The Saxon English language is pushed down the social scale. It becomes the tongue of servants, farmers, the poor. For the next 3 centuries, England will have a ruling class that speaks a different language from the people it rules. The fusion of those 2 languages eventually becomes Middle English, and eventually, through centuries of collision and borrowing, the language you're hearing right now. Under Norman rule, London grows with startling speed. By 1100, perhaps 15,000 people live here. By 1200, it may be 80,000. The city bursts beyond the Roman walls, spreading east toward the Tower, west toward Westminster, south across the river into Southwark. New parishes form, new churches rise, over 100 of them within the walls alone. London is becoming medieval Europe's great commercial engine, and everyone wants a piece of it. The city's merchants organize into guilds, and these guilds become more powerful than almost anyone anticipates. Goldsmiths, fishmongers, drapers, mercers, grocers. Each guild controls its trade absolutely. Who can practice it? At what price? To what standard? They build guild halls, accumulate wealth, fund churches. The guilds become so powerful that kings have to negotiate with them. London is learning that money is its own kind of sovereignty. In 1176, construction begins on a stone London bridge, and it will take 33 years to complete. When it's finished in 1209, it's unlike anything in Northern Europe. Nearly 300 meters long, 19 arches spanning the Thames. But this is no ordinary bridge. Almost immediately, buildings begin to appear along its length. Shops, houses, a chapel. At its peak, the bridge carries over 150 buildings on its surface. It is a street that crosses a river, a city on a bridge. For over 600 years, it will be the only Thames crossing in London. The bridge's southern gatehouse becomes London's most macabre display. The heads of executed traitors, boiled in salt and tar to preserve them, mounted on spikes, are visible to everyone crossing from the south. At various points in London's history, the heads of William Wallace, Thomas More, and Thomas Cromwell will all be displayed here. The bridge is London in miniature, beautiful, functional, and absolutely ruthless. In June 1215, rebellious barons force King John to Runnymede, a meadow beside the Thames west of London, and make him seal the Magna Carta. It is the first document in English history to establish that the king is subject to the law. London's role is crucial. The city has backed the barons, threatening to cut off royal finances. In exchange, London extracts its own concessions, the right to elect its own Lord Mayor, protection from arbitrary taxation. The city has discovered that withholding money is a form of power. It will not forget this lesson. In 1290, King Edward I's beloved Queen Eleanor of Castile dies in Nottinghamshire. Edward orders her body carried to Westminster for burial, and at every place the procession stops for the night, he erects a memorial cross. The last of these crosses stands at the final stop before Westminster, at a place called Charing Cross. The original cross is long gone, replaced by a Victorian replica, but the name endures, and the location, the official center point from which distances to London are measured, preserves a king's grief in the city's geography. Medieval London is extraordinary and appalling in equal measure. The streets are narrow, some barely wide enough for 2 people to pass. Upper floors of houses overhang the lanes so far that neighbors on opposite sides can almost shake hands across the gap. Pigs roam freely. Butchers slaughter animals in the street. The gutters run with filth. And in the middle of all this, churches, markets, schools, guild halls, one of the most vibrant cities in Europe, organize chaos, thriving on its own disorder. By the late 14th century, London's poor have had enough. The Black Death has killed half the workforce, which should have given survivors bargaining power. Instead, the ruling class passes laws to keep wages low and workers tied to their land. In June 1381, Wat Tyler leads tens of thousands of peasants and workers from Kent and Essex on London. They are not a mob. They have demands. They have leaders. They have a coherent vision of a more just England. Wat Tyler's army enters London, and crucially, London's own poor open the gates for them. They storm the Tower of London. They find the Archbishop of Canterbury hiding in the chapel and execute him on Tower Hill. They burn the palace of John of Gaunt, the king's uncle. The 14-year-old King Richard II rides out to meet them at Smithfield and makes promises. Tyler is murdered during the negotiations. The revolt is crushed. The leaders are hunted and executed. But the ruling class of England has learned something they cannot unlearn. The common people of London know their own power. But we must go back, before the revolt, before any of this, to the autumn of 1348, when ships arrive at London's docks, carrying cargo from the continent, and something else. The disease that will become known as the Black Death has already devastated France and Italy. Now it steps ashore in England. It travels on rats, on fleas, on the bodies of sailors who are already dying when their ships dock. London has no idea what is coming. Within months, London is transformed into a city of death. At the height of the plague, 200 people are dying every day. The churchyards fill within weeks. Mass graves, plague pits, are dug in fields outside the walls. When archaeologists excavate these sites today, they find skeletons buried in careful rows, evidence that even at the worst moments, someone was still trying to maintain order, still trying to offer the dead some dignity. By the time the first wave burns out in 1349, somewhere between a third and half of London's entire population is dead. In the aftermath of the Black Death, London is a city of absences, empty houses, closed businesses, unfinished buildings, entire streets where every family has been reduced or erased. The survivors are traumatized in a way that has no precedent. They have watched their neighbors, their children, their priests all die in the same weeks. And crucially, there is no explanation, no germ theory, no understanding of infection, just God's punishment, some say, for sins they cannot name. But the plague also reshapes London's economy in ways that will echo for centuries. With a third of the workforce dead, labor becomes scarce and valuable. Survivors can demand higher wages, better conditions, the freedom to move between employers. The rigid social hierarchies of medieval England begin slowly to loosen, not because anyone in power wants them to, but because the mathematics of death have changed the balance of everything. Despite the trauma of the plague and the revolt, the late 14th century sees a remarkable cultural flowering in London. The court of Richard II becomes one of the most sophisticated in Europe. Geoffrey Chaucer, a London boy, son of a vintner from Thames Street, is writing the Canterbury Tales, the first great work of English literature. His pilgrims set out from the Tabard Inn in Southwark, just south of London Bridge. The city is beginning to write itself into its own stories. Richard II's reign ends in the Tower. His cousin Henry Bolingbroke seizes the throne, and Richard, the king who survived the peasants' revolt as a teenager, the patron of Chaucer, the most cultured monarch of his age, dies in captivity in 1400, possibly starved, possibly murdered, certainly broken. The Tower, which William built to intimidate Londoners, has now begun consuming kings. It will not be the last. For much of the 15th century, England tears itself apart in the Wars of the Roses, the House of Lancaster against the House of York, both claiming the throne descended from Edward III. London navigates this civil war with characteristic pragmatism. The The city tends to support whoever controls the south of England and can guarantee trade. London's loyalty is ultimately to London. The tower's most enduring mystery belongs to 1483. The young King Edward V, 12 years old, and his 9-year-old brother Richard are lodged in the tower, supposedly for their protection. While their uncle Richard of Gloucester prepares the coronation, they are seen less and less frequently. Then, not at all. Richard of Gloucester becomes Richard III. The boys are never seen again. Bones discovered beneath a tower staircase in 1674 are believed to be theirs. What happened to the princes in the tower remains one of history's great unanswered questions and one of London's darkest rooms. On August the 22nd, 1485, Richard III rides into battle at Bosworth Field against the Welsh-born Henry Tudor. Richard charges personally toward Henry, almost reaches him, and is cut down. His crown, according to legend, rolls under a hawthorn bush and is retrieved and placed on Henry's head where he stands. The Plantagenet dynasty that has ruled England for 300 years is over in an afternoon. The Tudors are coming, and London is about to be transformed beyond recognition. By 1500, London's population has recovered to perhaps 50,000, back to where it was before the Black Death 150 years earlier. The city within its walls is one of the densest places on Earth. Over 100 parish churches serve a population crammed into streets that haven't changed since Alfred's time. The guilds are powerful. The merchants are rich. The poor are desperately poor. And on the throne sits a new dynasty, the Tudors, with a new vision of what England should be and what London should become. The transformation that is coming will make everything that came before look like a rehearsal. Henry VII arrives in London in 1485 as a man who has never expected to be king. He's survived exile, conspiracy, and battle to reach this moment, and he intends to hold on to it. His method is not conquest, but accumulation of wealth, of alliances, of legitimacy. He fills the royal treasury. He encourages merchants and trade. He makes London rich, and a rich London is a loyal London. In 24 years on the throne, he lays the foundations for everything his son will detonate. Henry VIII becomes king in 1509 at 17 years old, and London falls in love with him immediately. He is everything his careful, miserly father was not. Tall, handsome, athletic, musical, intellectual. He jousts. He composes music. He speaks 6 languages. The scholar Erasmus calls him the most gifted prince in Europe. London has no idea that this golden king will reshape their city, their church, and their entire world, driven ultimately by his inability to produce a male heir. Henry's break with Rome in the 1530s, driven by his need for a divorce and his appetite for the church's wealth, transforms London's physical landscape almost overnight. The monasteries that have anchored London's geography for centuries are seized and dissolved. Blackfriars, Greyfriars, Austin Friars, the Priory of St. John. Enormous landholdings suddenly available. Aristocrats and wealthy merchants buy them up and build grand houses on the ruins. London, compressed inside its ancient walls for centuries, suddenly has room to breathe and expand. The effect on London's growth is immediate and dramatic. By 1500, London had perhaps 50,000 people. By 1550, it's 90,000. By 1600, it's 200,000. By 1650, nearly 400,000. The largest city in Europe, surpassing Paris, surpassing Amsterdam, surpassing every rival. This explosion happens in a single century. London is not growing. It is erupting. The Tower of London witnesses Henry's reign with terrible intimacy. Anne Boleyn enters through the Traitor's Gate twice, first in 1533 for her coronation procession, as queens traditionally did, and again in 1536 as a prisoner. She is executed on Tower Green on the 19th of May, 1536. Her daughter Elizabeth is 2 years old. The child who will become England's greatest monarch watches her mother disappear into the Tower and never sees her again. Henry's son, Edward VI, makes England Protestant. His daughter Mary I makes it Catholic again and burns nearly 300 Protestants at Smithfield in 5 years, earning the name Bloody Mary. London watches its citizens burn for their beliefs and tries to calculate which way this will go. The Protestant martyrologist John Foxe records every name, every detail. His Book of Martyrs becomes one of the most widely read books in England, second only to the Bible. London is forming a collective memory of what religious persecution looks like, and it will not forget. Elizabeth I becomes queen in 1558 and reigns for 45 years. Under her, London becomes the cultural capital of Europe. She is the perfect monarch for a city of merchants and performers, theatrical, strategic, endlessly adaptable. She never marries, never produces an heir, and turns both facts into sources of power. The Virgin Queen belongs to everyone and no one. London, in particular, adores her, and she returns the compliment. In 1599, the Globe Theatre opens on the South Bank, just outside the city walls, in the jurisdiction of Southwark, where the city's authorities have less control. Here, William Shakespeare and his company stage plays that will become the foundation of the English literary canon: Hamlet, Othello, King Lear, Macbeth. 2,000 Londoners at a time, from the poorest apprentice to the wealthiest merchant, standing and sitting together, watching the same stories. The Globe is London's first great democratic cultural institution. Shakespeare doesn't just write in London, he writes London. His plays are saturated with the city, its merchants, its moneylenders, its crowds, its politics, its fog, its river. He lives in Southwark, walks across London Bridge every day, watches the heads on the gate, drinks in the taverns, listens to the arguments in the streets. The city pours itself into his work and is preserved there more vividly than in any history book. On the last day of the 16th century, a group of London merchants receive a royal charter from Elizabeth I to trade with Asia, the East India Company. It begins as a trading venture: pepper, spices, cloth. It will end a century and a half later as the private ruler of the Indian subcontinent, commanding its own army, collecting its own taxes, fighting its own wars. The most powerful corporation in history begins in a London counting house on New Year's Eve, 1600. Empire doesn't announce itself. It starts as a business plan. Elizabeth dies in 1603, childless, and the throne passes to James VI of Scotland, James I of England. 2 years into his reign, a group of Catholic conspirators places 36 barrels of gunpowder in the cellars beneath the Houses of Parliament, planning to blow up the king, the lords, and the entire government in a single explosion. Guy Fawkes is discovered in the cellar on the night of November the 4th. The plot fails, but the discovery confirms every Protestant fear about Catholic treachery, and England's religious divisions harden further. When Charles I raises his standard against Parliament in 1642, London makes its choice quickly and decisively. It sides with Parliament. The city's merchants, its guilds, its Puritan community, its memories of arbitrary royal taxation, all push in the same direction. London's walls are strengthened with an 18-mile ring of earthworks built by the citizens themselves, men and women digging side by side. The Royalists never take London. and without London's wealth and manpower, Charles I cannot win the war. On the 30th of January, 1649, Charles I walks through a window of the banqueting house in Whitehall, whose ceiling is painted with images of his father ascending to heaven, and onto a scaffold erected in the street outside. He is the first king in European history to be executed by his own people following a public trial. When the axe falls, a witness records that the crowd makes a sound they have never heard before and will never hear again. A single collective groan from thousands of people at once. England has done something it cannot undo. Under Oliver Cromwell's Commonwealth, London is forced into Puritan austerity. The theaters are closed. Christmas celebrations are banned. The bear-baiting rings and the pleasure gardens shut down. The city that invented English popular culture, that built the Globe, that filled Southwark's taverns every night, goes dark. When Charles II is restored to the throne in 1660, London's relief and joy are entirely genuine. The people pour into the streets. The king is coming back, and with him, everything that makes London London. Charles II rides into London on his 30th birthday, the 29th of May, 1660. Samuel Pepys, a young naval administrator who will become London's greatest diarist, watches from the crowd and records that the streets are lined so thick with people that he can barely see the road. Church bells ring across the entire city simultaneously. The theaters reopen within months. The pleasure gardens return. London, after 11 years of enforced solemnity, begins to party and barely stops before disaster strikes. The celebrations of the Restoration last barely 5 years before London is struck by catastrophe. In the spring of 1665, plague returns to the city. It begins in the parish of St. Giles in the Fields, spreads east through the crowded slums, and by summer it is killing 7,000 Londoners every week. Every infected house is marked with a red cross and the words, "Lord, have mercy upon us." The wealthy, including most of the royal court, flee to the countryside. The poor have nowhere to go. At the plague's peak, London is the quietest it has been since the Roman withdrawal 1,200 years earlier. Streets that normally cannot contain their crowds are empty. Shops are shuttered. The markets are silent. Samuel Pepys walks through the city and records seeing almost no one, just occasional figures hurrying with their faces covered and the dead carts moving in the early morning. By the time the plague burns out in the winter of 1665, approximately 100,000 people are dead. A fifth of the city's population, gone in 8 months. It has been the hottest, driest summer anyone can remember. The city is tinder. 80,000 buildings, almost all of them timber and thatch, packed together in streets so narrow that upper floors overhang and nearly touch across the gap. Open fires in every building, candles everywhere, no fire brigade. In the early hours of September the 2nd, 1666, a baker on Pudding Lane fails to extinguish his oven properly. A spark catches. The wind is blowing hard from the east. For 4 days, London burns. The fire moves faster than people can run from it. It jumps streets, crosses alleys, consumes entire parishes in hours. St. Paul's Cathedral, the medieval one, enormous, one of the great buildings of Europe, burned so hot that the lead roof melts and runs down Ludgate Hill in rivers. 87 churches destroyed, 13,000 houses gone. When it finally burns out on September the 6th, 85% of the city within the old Roman walls is ash. 100,000 Londoners are homeless. They camp in the fields north of the city in makeshift shelters, surrounded by whatever they manage to carry. Remarkably, the death toll from the fire itself is tiny. Perhaps 6 confirmed dead, though the true number is almost certainly higher among the poorest who had nowhere to run. What is destroyed is not lives, but livelihoods. The city's entire commercial infrastructure, the warehouses, the counting houses, the exchanges, the shops, all gone. Christopher Wren, 34 years old, already a brilliant mathematician and architect, presents his plans for a new London within days of the fire ending. Wide, straight boulevards, grand piazzas, a rational classical city worthy of the greatest capital in Europe. His plans are brilliant. They are also almost completely rejected. Property rights are too complicated, too entangled to simply redraw. The pressure to rebuild is too urgent. London's medieval street plan, the same basic layout since Alfred the Great, survives the greatest fire in its history because people simply rebuild on the same plots they've always owned. What Wren does get to build is St. Paul's Cathedral. The new one, his design, takes 35 years to complete, from 1675 to 1710. The dome, inspired by Michelangelo's St. Peter's in Rome, rises 365 feet above the city. Wren is buried inside it, beneath a simple Latin inscription, Lector, si monumentum requeris, circumspice. Reader, if you seek his monument, look around you. The cathedral will survive the Blitz 3 centuries later, standing defiant in photographs that become some of the most powerful images of the Second World War. The rebuilt London is physically different from what burned. New building regulations passed immediately after the fire require brick and stone instead of timber and thatch. Streets are slightly wider. Buildings have more regulated heights. The city that rises from the ashes is more fire-resistant, more durable, more permanent. The medieval street plan survives, but the medieval materials do not. London has been accidentally modernized by its own destruction. In the rebuilt, enlightened London of the early 18th century, the coffee house becomes the city's central institution. For the price of a penny, the admission fee, any man can sit all day, read the newspapers, hear the latest news, join any conversation. There are over 500 coffee houses in London by 1700. Lloyd's Coffee House evolves into Lloyd's of London, still the world's leading insurance market. Jonathan's Coffee House, where stockbrokers trade shares, becomes the London Stock Exchange. The financial architecture of the modern world is built on coffee and conversation. London in the late 17th and early 18th century is also the center of the scientific revolution. The Royal Society, founded in 1660, given royal charter by Charles II, brings together the greatest minds in Europe. Isaac Newton publishes his Principia Mathematica in London in 1687, describing the laws that govern the universe. Edmund Halley calculates the orbit of the comet that now bears his name, the same comet that frightened Harold Godwinson's court in 1066, and correctly predicts its return. George Frederick Handel arrives in London from Germany in 1712 and never really leaves. He composes water music for King George I's River Party in 1717, 50 musicians on a barge, the music carrying across the Thames. He writes Messiah. He writes the coronation anthems still used at British coronations today. He dies in London in 1759 and is buried in Westminster Abbey. A German composer who became the most English of musicians in a city that has always taken the best of whoever arrives and made it its own. The 18th century gives London its most elegant face. Georgian architecture, clean lines, perfect proportions, the terraced squares of Mayfair, Bloomsbury, and Marylebone transforms the west of the city into one of the most beautiful urban landscapes in Europe. Bedford Square, Grosvenor Square, Berkeley Square. These are not public projects. They're investments by aristocratic landowners who understand that elegance drives value. London builds beauty for profit, and the profit is considerable. But William Hogarth, London's great satirical artist, shows the other side. His print Gin Lane, published in 1751, depicts the St. Giles rookery during the gin epidemic. A mother dropping her infant, people collapsed in the streets, a city consuming itself on cheap alcohol. London has always contained its extremes in close proximity. The distance between Bedford Square's elegance and St. Giles's devastation is less than half a mile. The city that builds the most beautiful streets in Europe simultaneously allows conditions of poverty that are almost incomprehensible. In 1780, London experiences the worst riots in its history. The Gordon Riots, triggered by opposition to Catholic emancipation, turn into something far larger and more frightening. 6 days of insurrection in which the city's poor attack not just Catholics, but prisons, banks, and any symbol of authority they can reach. Newgate Prison is stormed and burned. The Bank of England is defended by troops. Over 300 people are killed in the restoration of order. London has reminded itself and its rulers that beneath the elegant surface, the pressure never entirely goes away. When Napoleon is finally defeated at Waterloo in June 1815, London understands immediately what it means. Britain is now the undisputed dominant power on earth. Its navy controls the seas. Its merchants control the trade routes. Its banks hold the capital. And London, already the largest city in Europe, is where all of it flows through. The 19th century will belong to London in a way that no city has owned a century before or since. The numbers are almost impossible to absorb. In 1801, London has just over 1 million people, already the largest city in the world. By 1851, 2.5 million. By 1901, 6.5 million. In a single century, London's population grows sixfold. No city in human history has ever grown at this speed to this size. The infrastructure, the housing, the water, the sewage, the transport cannot possibly keep pace. The result is both the most dynamic and the most brutal city on earth. The engine of all this growth is trade, and the trade flows through the East End docks. The West India docks open in 1802, the London docks in 1805, the East India docks in 1806. At their peak, the London docks handle a third of the world's trade: sugar from the Caribbean, tea from India, spices from Asia, timber from the Baltic, cotton from America, picked by enslaved people whose labor feeds the mills that feed the wealth that builds the city. Empire is not abstract. It arrives at the docks every morning. Trafalgar Square takes shape in the 1840s as a monument to naval supremacy. Nelson's column, 52 meters high, the admiral standing at the top with his back to the Admiralty, is completed in 1843. The 4 bronze lions added in 1867. The square becomes London's central public space, the place where the city gathers to celebrate, to protest, to mark the moments that matter. Every New Year's Eve, every major political demonstration, every victory and every grief. Trafalgar Square is where London comes to feel itself. In October 1834, the old Palace of Westminster burns down. The replacement, designed by Charles Barry and Augustus Pugin in Gothic Revival style, rises through the 1840s and 1850s. When Big Ben first strikes the hour in 1859, its sound becomes London's voice. That sound, deep, measured, authoritative, will be broadcast to the world during the darkest nights of the Blitz 80 years later, proof that London still stands. In May 1851, the Great Exhibition opens in Hyde Park in a building unlike anything the world has seen, the Crystal Palace, designed by the gardener Joseph Paxton, an enormous greenhouse of prefabricated iron and plate glass. Inside, 14,000 exhibitors from 40 countries. 6 million people visit over 5 months. a third of the entire population of Britain. Queen Victoria visits 40 times. It is Britain's statement to the world. We have mastered the material universe, but a mile east of the Crystal Palace's triumphant iron and glass, another London exists. The East End rookeries, dense warrens of overcrowded courts and alleys where entire families share single rooms, where children work from the age of 6, where the water supply is contaminated with the same sewage it's supposed to carry away. Charles Dickens walks these streets at night, unable to sleep, writing what he sees into Oliver Twist, Bleak House, our mutual friend. He is not exaggerating. In August 1854, cholera erupts in the Soho neighborhood of London. Within 3 days, 127 people on or near Broad Street are dead. A local doctor named John Snow does something radical. He maps every death, going door to door with a notebook, plotting each case on a street map. The pattern is unmistakable. Every death clusters around a single water pump on Broad Street. Snow convinces the parish council to remove the pump handle. The outbreak stops almost immediately. Snow has just invented the science of epidemiology. By 1858, the Thames is an open sewer. 3 million people's waste flows directly into the river, which is also the city's drinking water supply. In the summer of that year, the smell becomes so extreme that Parliament is forced to suspend its sessions. The Great Stink. The government finally acts. Joseph Bazalgette designs and builds an entirely new underground sewer system, 83 miles of main sewers, over 1,000 miles of street sewers, diverting London's waste away from the river. His sewers, still in use today, save more lives than almost any other single project in London's history. On the 10th of January, 1863, the Metropolitan Railway opens between Paddington and Farringdon, the world's first underground passenger railway. 40,000 people ride it on the first day. The steam locomotives fill the tunnels with smoke, and passengers emerge blackened and coughing. It doesn't matter. The idea is so clearly correct that it spreads immediately. London's underground network expands for the next century and a half, eventually carrying over 1 billion passengers a year. Every metro system in every city on Earth begins here, in a smoky tunnel under Paddington. Tower Bridge opens in June 1894 after 8 years of construction. It is an engineering achievement disguised as a Gothic fairy tale. The medieval towers conceal a sophisticated hydraulic bascule mechanism that can raise the roadway in 90 seconds to let tall ships through. Tower Bridge instantly becomes London's signature image, recognized on every continent. It is the most photographed bridge on Earth, and it still works exactly as it did in 1894. In the autumn of 1888, Whitechapel becomes the center of London's most enduring nightmare. Between August and November, at least 5 women are murdered in the streets and courts of the East End. The killer, who signs taunting letters to the police, Jack the Ripper, is never identified. The case exposes the conditions in which London's poorest women live, unprotected, invisible, expendable, and becomes a permanent symbol of the Victorian city's darkest contradictions. The richest empire the world has ever seen, and women dying in its gutters, uncounted. In the early 20th century, London becomes the battleground for women's suffrage. Emmeline Pankhurst and the Women's Social and Political Union move from petitions to direct action, smashing windows on Oxford Street, chaining themselves to railings, going on hunger strike in prison. In 1913, Emily Wilding Davison steps onto the Epsom racecourse during the Derby and is struck by the King's horse. She dies 4 days later. In 1918, women over 30 with property are finally given the vote. In 1928, all women over 21. London in the late 17th and early 18th century is also the center of the scientific revolution. The Royal Society, founded in 1660, given royal charter by Charles II, brings together the greatest minds in Europe. Isaac Newton publishes his Principia Mathematica in London in 1687, describing the laws that govern the universe. Edmund Halley calculates the orbit of the comet that now bears his name, the same comet that frightened Harold Godwinson's court in 1066, and correctly predicts its return. George Frederick Handel arrives in London from Germany in 1712 and never really leaves. He composes water music for King George I's river party in 1717. 50 musicians on a barge, the music carrying across the Thames. He writes Messiah. He writes the coronation anthems still used at British coronations today. He dies in London in 1759 and is buried in Westminster Abbey, a German composer who became the most English of musicians in a city that has always taken the best of whoever arrives and made it its own. The 18th century gives London its most elegant face. Georgian architecture, clean lines, perfect proportions, the terraced squares of Mayfair, Bloomsbury, and Marylebone transforms the west of the city into one of the most beautiful urban landscapes in Europe. Bedford Square, Grosvenor Square, Berkeley Square. These are not public projects. They're investments by aristocratic landowners who understand that elegance drives value. London builds beauty for profit, and the profit is considerable. But William Hogarth, London's great satirical artist, shows the other side. His print Gin Lane, published in 1751, depicts the St. Giles Rookery during the gin epidemic. A mother dropping her infant, people collapsed in the streets, a city consuming itself on cheap alcohol. London has always contained its extremes in close proximity. The distance between Bedford Square's elegance and St. Giles' devastation is less than half a mile. The city that builds the most beautiful streets in Europe simultaneously allows conditions of poverty that are almost incomprehensible. In 1780, London experiences the worst riots in its history. The Gordon riots, triggered by opposition to Catholic emancipation, turn into something far larger and more frightening. 6 days of insurrection in which the city's poor attack not just Catholics but prisons, banks, and any symbol of authority they can reach. Newgate Prison is stormed and burned. The Bank of England is defended by troops. Over 300 people are killed in the restoration of order. London has reminded itself and its rulers that beneath the elegant surface, the pressure never entirely goes away. In the first days of September 1939, London evacuates its children. Over 3 days, more than 600,000 children leave the city. Labels tied to their coats with their names and destinations, small suitcases, gas mask boxes. They go to the countryside, to strangers' homes, to villages that have never seen a Londoner. Many have never left the city before. Some will not see their parents for years. Some will come back to find their homes destroyed. The evacuation is an act of love that tears families apart. On the 7th of September 1940, the Luftwaffe launches its first mass raid on London. 348 bombers, escorted by fighters, fly up the Thames in broad daylight and drop their bombs on the East End docks. Within hours, the docks are burning so fiercely that the fires serve as a navigation beacon for the second wave of bombers that night. Over 400 Londoners die on the first day. The Blitz has begun. For the next 57 nights without interruption, German bombers will return to London every night. The government initially discourages use of the underground as air raid shelters. They fear it will create a shelter mentality. But Londoners simply buy platform tickets and refuse to leave. By mid-September, 170,000 people are sleeping in the underground every night. On the platforms, in the tunnels, on the escalators. They bring food, books, bedding. They form communities. They look after each other's children. The underground becomes London's living heart, the city beating underground while its surface burns. On the night of December the 29th, 1940, the Germans dropped tens of thousands of incendiary bombs on the city of London in a deliberate attempt to create a firestorm. The area around St. Paul's is devastated, but the cathedral itself survives, thanks to volunteer fire watchers who spend the night on the roof, throwing incendiary bombs off the dome before they can take hold. The photograph taken that night, St. Paul's dome rising through smoke and flame, becomes the most powerful image of the war. Churchill orders it published immediately. Its message is not religious. It is London's message to the world. We are still here. Churchill understands instinctively that his job during the Blitz is not primarily military. It is theatrical. He walks through the bombed streets of the East End while the rubble is still warm, makes the V sign, weeps openly in front of survivors. He is performing courage for a city that needs to see it performed. And London responds. The morale surveys conducted during the Blitz find, repeatedly, that Londoners are not breaking. They are angry, they are tired, they are grieving, but they are not broken. When the last major Blitz raid ends on the night of the 10th of May, 1941, London counts its losses. Over 30,000 civilians killed in the city, 1 million buildings damaged or destroyed. The House of Commons chamber, countless medieval churches, thousands of Victorian terraces, gone. Entire streets erased. But London is still a functioning city. The factories are working. The underground is running. London has been wounded to its foundations. And it will rebuild. It always rebuilds. On the 8th of May, 1945, London celebrates as it has never celebrated before and has never celebrated since. Trafalgar Square fills beyond any crowd it has held. People climb lampposts, statues, the lions. Strangers kiss in the streets. The young Princess Elizabeth, 19 years old, slips out of Buckingham Palace with a small group disguised in service caps and joins the crowds anonymously. One young woman among millions, swept along in the joy of survival. She will remember it for the rest of her life. Through everything, through every conquest and catastrophe, every plague and fire and war and reinvention, the Thames has been the constant. It was here before the Romans chose this crossing point. It carried the Viking longships. It reflected the flames of the Great Fire. It ran black with sewage until Bazalgette cleaned it. It watched the Blitz from below. It still flows, tidal, patient, indifferent to the drama conducted on its banks. Every version of London has been oriented to this river. Every version of London that comes next will be too. London is not a monument. It is not a museum. It is not a postcard. It is a living city, messy, contradictory, unfinished, perpetually under construction, perpetually arguing with itself about what it should be. It has been burned to the ground and rebuilt. It has been emptied of its population and refilled. It has absorbed every culture, every language, every people that has arrived at its docks and its airports, and it has made something new from every arrival. That is what London does. That is what London has always done. For 2,000 years, the city has had one consistent answer to every catastrophe, every conquest, every ending. It keeps going. The Romans built a city here because of a river crossing. They are long gone. The Saxons who feared the ruins, the Normans who built a tower to intimidate the people they'd conquered, the medieval merchants, the Tudors, the fire, the plague, the empire, the bombs. All of it happened here, on this ground, beside this river. And the city that results from all of it, improbable, extraordinary, impossible, is still here. still growing, still after 2,000 years, becoming what it is. This is London. It was never finished. It never will be.